Were you a fan of the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series and are curious on whether or not the Netflix adaptation does the books justice? Or did you see the adaptation and are just curious how the book is different? In this video, I'm going to talk about the differences between the book and the show based on the plot, characters, and relationships. And I may even let you know about one little twist that kind of changed my perspective of the entire story, which means that there will be spoilers for the book and the TV show. So if you don't want to be spoiled and just want my overall thoughts, you can use the chapters down below to navigate to my thoughts at the end. So Holly Jackson wrote the first A Good Girl's Guide to Murder book, which was released back in 2019. The series has won multiple awards and is a #1 New York Times bestseller. If you're not familiar with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, this is the story of Pip Fitz emoji. This tells the story of Pip, who for her EPQ or her capstone project, depending on which country you're reading the book in, which we'll get to that in a moment, she has decided that she is going to investigate the disappearance of someone who disappeared from her school 5 years ago, because she believes that the person who was accused of her murder was innocent. And if you weren't aware, Netflix released an adaptation of the first book that released on August 1st of this year. Here's what I think was better in the book from a plot perspective. And this is a big one. I honestly feel like the clues were better laid out in the book. I was honestly a little bit confused as I watched the show the first time. And then when I was reading the book, I honestly felt like the show left out a ton of clues. But then I watched the show again, and in retrospect, a lot of those clues are there. They're just kind of said in like passing one-liners where if you didn't read the book, you might not have picked up on it. That kind of made following the case, which is kind of the whole point of this story, difficult to follow. But overall, I think the book did a really good job with laying early threads that will tie into the answers that are provided by the end of the book, such as the disappearing food at the Ward's house, or the fact that we learn about the Bell family dynamics a lot earlier in the book. And the threads for the true reason why Andy was murdered are laid a lot earlier in the book. From a plot perspective, here's what I think was better in the show. The show gave Max and the drug dealer, whose name I'm currently forgetting, a little bit more incentive to talk to Pip in the first place. Whether or not I agree with those changes, I do remember thinking as I was reading the book that I'm like, she just straight up walks up to a drug dealer and starts asking him about something pretty shady and illegal. That doesn't seem super realistic to me. Does it seem realistic in the show? No. But I do at least appreciate that they made the effort to have a bit more incentive. So with Max, it was the I'll take a shot for every question that you answer. And she uses kind of a similar tactic when she finds out that the guy who leads her to the drug dealer owes the drug dealer money. She says, I'll give you the money, 20 quid per question. I get 3 questions. So that made a little bit more sense, but still wasn't super realistic. The show also makes Max a lot less sympathetic. Like, he's honestly pretty sympathetic in the book. Not that I am excusing his actions in any way, shape, or form, because that is horrendous. A lot of people do horrendous things in this book and the TV show. But the show definitely makes Max a more ominous character in a way that I feel plays really well into his storyline. I also appreciate that they made the not Andy character not be a person with an intellectual disability. Here's what I think could have been better in the adaptation after reading the book. After reading the way the plot unfolds in the book, I feel like the plot in the show is revealed either very clumsily or rushed or honestly too convenient. This is actually not about the adaptation, because I initially was going to go on to this whole thing about why they changed the country in the adaptation as opposed to the book. But then in researching this video, I found out that Holly is actually British. That means that the adaptation follows the UK version of the book, which is set in the UK, just like the adaptation is. And I'm honestly kind of mad at the publishers of the books for switching the US version to Connecticut, because honestly, I was just real confused and like trying to figure out the differences between like a capstone and an EPQ, because high school and college are different between the UK and the US. And also ages of consent are different between the UK and the US, which is kind of important when your romantic interest is 20 years old and your protagonist is a teenager. And I just don't really understand the need for that change between the UK and the US version. Let American youths learn a little bit about what it's like to live in other countries. Anyway, side rant aside. Sorry, it really bothered me. The other thing that I felt could have been better in the adaptation, and I have kind of big feelings about it, is that the adaptation really made the villains more villainous and made Andy a lot more sympathetic, which honestly, in my opinion, after reading the book, you kind of lose the core message of the book by doing that. Because I feel like the core message of this book is when a good person is pushed too far, they will do bad things. And so by making your villains more villainous, inherently, you lose that message. All right, let's talk about characters. So I'm going to focus on 3 characters that I think are really important to the story. So we're going to talk about Andy, Ravi, and Pip. So the show really tried to make Andy more sympathetic, like I just mentioned, and they did this in a couple ways. Of course, they made her seem like a better sister. You see a picture with her and her sister that looks like they're really happy. Now we realize that the Bell family is a family that isn't how it appears, but they did try to make Andy and Becca seem like close sisters in the show, whereas in the book, that doesn't really seem to be the case. The show also tried to make it look like Andy really loved Sal in spite of all the things that she did. And it does succeed in that, I think, really well. That is not the case in the book. Honestly, her relationship with Sal is really secondary, other than the fact that Sal was blamed for her murder. I don't think that the show did any favors by making Andy more sympathetic as a victim, and I don't think the show did any favors by making Andy less of a problematic character, because in the book, when I was reading it, the message that I got from Andy's character is that how you treat people matters. And I don't know about you, but I feel like that's a pretty important message. Ravi in the show is a little bit more of a somber character than he, at least in my brain as I was reading, seemed to be in the book, which is honestly, given everything that he's been through, a bit more realistic. I do like that in the show, they also let Ravi figure out some of the clues that Pip figures out in the books. It really kind of made him seem like a partner to her who was really trying to help her out. Whereas Ravi in the book just tends to be a little bit of a white horse who comes riding in when she needs him. However, I do feel like I missed a little bit of Ravi's more lighthearted, almost golden retriever energy. They tried to replicate that between him and Pip being all cute whenever like she was noticing things and like the looks they gave each other, but it honestly felt contrived and not very natural. And I don't know if it was the directing or just the fact that the actors may not have had really great chemistry, because when they weren't trying to show that they had chemistry, they had good chemistry. So that makes me think that maybe it's the way it was directed. Of course, I didn't realize it the first time I watched it, but in retrospect, I needed that moment where Ravi really realizes that his brother is innocent and is just like basking in that knowledge. It's such a beautiful moment in the book, and I missed that. Let's talk about Pippa. I'm going to first say that I loved Emma Myers in Wednesday. That being said, I did not like how Pippa is portrayed in the adaptation. And I feel like the way the adaptation was shot, unless you had read the book and got the internal monologue from Pippa, you wouldn't have necessarily understood where Pippa was coming from. And the whole kind of premise is that Pippa is a very smart person. She is a good girl. One of Pippa's key things is that she's very intelligent. Don't get me wrong, I still feel like she was intelligent in the show, but she makes some real stupid decisions, especially when she's committing crimes, which she is committing crimes unless the laws in England are completely different. Like, she didn't wear gloves when she went into the Bell's house. Another thing I had issue with when it comes to Pippa is the way the show decided to depict Pippa as a good girl, in that good seemed to equate to naive. And Pippa isn't naive in the book. She's very intelligent and she's very pragmatic. And the third thing I didn't really like about Pippa's portrayal in the adaptation was her motivation for wanting to solve this case in the first place. The book very early on tells you how close Sal and Naomi were, so it makes sense because she actually knew him pretty well because Naomi was her best friend's sister, so they would always be kind of at the house together, and that's how she knew Sal. And I thought this the first time I watched it, even before I read the book. I was still confused by her motivations, even after they showed this scene where she sees Andy go into the room and say, "Don't tell anybody," and then she tells Sal. And they replay that scene like it's some big reveal. So I was kind of expecting for Pip to have done something really wrong, or for Pip to know that they weren't actually fighting or had made up because she was like eavesdropping on the conversation that they had in that room or something. Something to make us understand why she was doing this. And I just never feel like I got that. So in the end, we end up watching this scene over and over and over with no real payoff, and that kind of just pissed me off. All right, let's move on to relationships. So I'm going to start with Pippa and Ravi, and I honestly feel like how I mentioned when we're talking about Ravi's character, I feel like Pippa and Ravi had a much closer relationship in the book than they did in the show. I really hated that Ravi left in the show right when Pippa needed him most. And I realized this might be kind of a save the cat dark moment of the soul thing where, you know, Pippa's kind of hitting her rock bottom. But honestly, I feel like it wasn't needed. And it just kind of made me question their whole romantic relationship, which I realized wasn't romantic at that point, but was definitely getting there. And as I mentioned before, I do feel like the chemistry was a little bit forced, especially early on, like the buildup of their chemistry. Whereas like if they hadn't done like the cheeky little looks and glances, I feel like it would have come off much more natural like it does in the book. In the book, Pip's like subconsciously noticing things, but she hasn't put it necessarily together that she likes him. So yeah, I just felt like their chemistry was a little bit contrived. By the time we get to the point where she's about to admit how she feels about him and then he says he's going to leave, that was actually really good. And I felt the chemistry between them from that point. And when they were working on the cases and just like talking together, I could feel the chemistry. But when they were trying to make us notice the chemistry is when they lost the chemistry. Does that make sense? All right, next we're going to talk about relationships in a slightly different way than I've done in the past. I've usually done one character's relationship with another character, but I'm going to talk more about family relationships in relation to Pip. So of course we've got to start off with Pip and her family, the Fitz Amobis. So first we of course have to start off with Pip and her relationship with the Fitz-a-Mobies. And I do appreciate that her family takes a more prevalent role in the adaptation, because honestly, in the books, they're just kind of there until Barney disappears. I think it was smart to make her mom a little bit of the moral compass for Pip, because the book opens up with the note from the teacher saying, under no circumstances are you supposed to talk to the victim's family or the perpetrator's family. And her mom kind of plays that role in the show, which makes sense for a mom. And I was honestly surprised after seeing the show that her mom didn't play a bigger part in the book. On the other side, I hated the red herring they added with her father. I just thought it was stupid. It didn't need to be there. I mean, the resolution of it was sweet and kind of helps to ground Pippa, and I do understand that. But overall, I just thought it didn't need to be there. While Pip's relationship with her family is important, the real family dynamic that we have to talk about is Pip and the Wards. I think the adaptation did a spot-on job with how Pip and Naomi's relationship came off in the book. I also really appreciated the depth they added to Kara's character, because honestly in the book she came off kind of one note, and I feel like Kara being very protective over Naomi because Naomi was close with Sal makes sense. And I really liked that it made their friendship a little bit more dynamic, but also in a lot of ways, because they had these issues that they worked through, I think it made their friendship come off even stronger than it does in the book. Because one of the people I've been friends with the most, it's not that we never fight or never disagree, but when we do, we talk about it. And in a lot of ways, that has often made our relationship stronger. And I just appreciated that realism. I was pretty torn over how they portrayed Mr. Ward in the show. In general, I didn't feel like the whole abduction plot needed to be there, and they definitely made the abduction plot a lot more malevolent in the adaptation, which I didn't like after reading the book. And that's, like I said, because you're kind of losing the core message, is that even good people, although yes, Mr. Ward is 100% a predator. I am not excusing his behavior at all. I'm just saying, again, in the message of the book, to frame that good people can do bad things when pushed too far, I think Mr. Ward is a prime example of that, because for the majority of his life, he went through being a good person. So the reason I wanted to do a book versus adaptation video to this is because I remember when this book first came out, what a huge hit it was. Like, I felt like everybody was talking about it. And I was excited because as much as I have a love-hate relationship with Netflix, I will say Netflix adaptations usually hit for me. And I've never read a YA mystery before, so I was curious how I would enjoy a YA mystery. So I don't think it's any surprise that I liked the book better in this instance. However, I do wish that I had the UK edition of this book so I could really see how close it was, because as I was trying to prepare for this video, I was thrown off by the different settings. Overall, the show just felt a little bit jumbled and rushed. The book felt very laid out and very logical and very methodical, which I feel like you kind of need in a mystery. If you're into YA mysteries, make sure you watch my book versus adaptation to Lockwood & Co. next. Just like A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, it delivers twists and suspense and action and mystery. So make sure you watch to see how the series compares to the source material. That was definitely a pun, and you should go watch it to find out why. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.